as the yard site. Some of the largest Hungarian transports were sent to Auschwitz on the Shkoda. So thousands upon thousands of Hungarian. I know my Shver kept the yard site for his parents and all of his lost relatives on the Shkoda. It's a very big Hungarian yard site.
Also Shavuos. Also Shavuos.
This is
they didn't know the yard site, and they held Shavuos because that was also.
That's right. And by the Crusades as well, it was now in one of the kinnis, we actually say that the community of Worms was massacred while they were saying Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. I'm sorry?
No, I'm just.
And then there's Rabbeinu Tam, who's dragged out of the Besmedrash and beaten to death, and left for dead in a field on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Rabbeinu Tam, he was there by the Crusades. The Crusades ravished Olam and Worms, and that was right around suicide. So historically, a lot of bad things happened on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. But another thing that happened on Rosh Chodesh Sivan was Klal Yisrael came to the foot of Har Sinai, Ke'ish Echad V'Lev Echad. So Rosh Chodesh Sivan is a time where Klal Yisrael unified, and with that, in discuss of that unification, we should have big Yeshuas. I'm sure everybody saw the fraudulent email that went around about the speech that Netanyahu gave in the parliament about thanking the Gazans, the Hamas, for unifying Klal Yisrael, and now we're going to come in and we're going to take over Gaza and throw everybody out. I'm sure a lot of people saw it. I knew it was a fraud when it came out yesterday because it also came out by the last Gaza war, and it was a fraud then too. But it was still fun to read. Everyone who read it says, "Oh, finally!" And then there was a fraud, but it was still fun to read. Okay. 7 years ago, it was a fraud. That never happened. Yeah. Zok the Heilige Gemara. So yesterday we were discussing the inyan of Tevilah before one entered the Azara. And Rabbi Yehuda held that it was merely a gzera to remind people to focus on Tumah, to remind them maybe they became Tumah and they shouldn't be going into the Azara at all. And Ben Zoyma learned that it's a deraisa, and we learned it from a Kavachomer, Madach to Kohen Gadol, who's transferring from Avodah to Avodah, from the Pnim to the Chutz, from the Mizbeach HaChitzon to the Hechel, and each time he went back and forth, he had to toivel. Surely, if you're transferring from a Makom Choil, such as the Harabayas, to a Makom Kodesh, such as the Azara, surely then you would have to toivel. And then we had the Rabbanan of Rabbi Yehuda that have a discussion by Mitzayra. They said a Mitzayra had to toivel, even though he toiveled the night before, they had to toivel before they entered the Azara, but not anybody else. And the Gemara suggested that the Rabbanan argue both on Ben Zayma and Rabbi Yehuda, and hold that only Mitzayra requires a special tefillah, even though they toiveled the night before, because shiny Mitzayra did dayish betuma, since for the last couple of weeks when the Mitzayra was Tameh Yikra, when he was in the depth of his Tumah, he had no concern. Whatever he touched, he didn't care if anything was Tameh. It was so not relevant to him because he was very Tameh. Now that he's coming out of that cycle, he had to have a greater awareness so that he shouldn't become Tameh by mistake. Amar le Abaye Rav Yosef. Abaye told you Yosef. And Rashi is not Goris le Rav Yehuda. He just goes Tefillah Zu, this Tefillah, and the tefillah that we're talking about, the Rashi, is the tefillah of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the tefillah is not a derisive tefillah. It's just to remind somebody to think back that I become tameh by mistake and forgot about it. Chaytitz or any chaytitz, is there a problem with chatzitza? But the halacha is by a tefillah derisa, if ruboy hamakpid alav, if you have a chatzitza on most of your body, and you're makpid on whatever the chatzitza is that you want it off, it's going to be a mafsik. However, if the chatzitza is only on a small part of your body, even though you're makpid on it, or if the chatzitza is covering most of your body, but not makpid on it, midaraisa, that's not a chatzitza. And midrabanon, they were geyser that even if you're not makpid on it, but if it covers a big portion of your body, or if it's a small little thing, but you're makpid on it, that's a chatzitza. And that's why we're very careful with chatzitza when we toivel. So the question is, this is only by a tevila deraisa. What about a tevila derabanan, like according to Rabbi Yehuda, but the only reason why you're toiveling is not really to retire yourself, it's just to act as a reminder. Would there be a problem of chatzitzas? Omerle. So Rabbi Yosef answered again. So this whole thing is Abaye discussing something with his Rabbi Yosef, called the tikkun rabbanan ken deraisa tikkun. When they make a takana and mechayev tefillah, they are mechayev the same type of tefillah that the deraisa is mechayev, and that means we have to be makbid on chatzitzas. That's what Rashi is. Tosfos says it's possible that the shaila. So Tosfos asks on Rashi, if your shaila is only according to Rabbi Yehuda, that this is a tefillah derabanan, why wasn't it mentioned? And that's why you see in the brackets, like Rabbi Yehuda Amar Srach, tefillah zu chotz. Tosfos says those brackets should be in. According to Rashi, you should be gurish those brackets, because if the shaila is only according to Rabbi Yehuda, why didn't we say so? Tosfos learns the shaila is even according to Ben Zoma, and he says that even according to Ben Zoma, that is a chiyuv deraisa to toivel. That's only if you're going with the intent to do avodah. But if you're only going just to watch and not to do avodah, then even Ben Zoma would agree that the tefillah is a tefillah derabanan, and therefore Tosfos says the shaila could be even according to Ben Zoma. So Amalei Abai Rabbi Yosef, bia b'mitzvah shma bia eloi. The halacha is, what if I don't completely walk into the Azor? I should stick my hand in. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this tefillah derabanan, would you have to toivel even though you're not going completely into the Azara? You're only putting part of your hand into the Azara, part of your body into the Azara. We know that the Mitzayra only sticks the tip of his thumb into the Azara. He's standing outside. The Tanya we learned, Mitzayra toivel, and we learned that the Mitzayra, who already toiveled the night before, so he's for sure tar, he still has to toivel again. So you see clearly that this tefillah, that Rabbi Yehuda's mechayev, only else a reminder for him to think of whether or not he's tamei, also is required to stick your little thumb into the azara. Ibailu, ma'u sheyasa sakin arucha v'yisrod. What would be the halacha if someone didn't want to come into the azara? So he shechted from outside the azara. The problem is, how's he going to reach? So he had a very long chalif. He had a 10-foot chalif. He was standing outside the azara, and he shechted an animal that was inside the azara. Would he need to get a tefillah? Tiboyi leven zoyma and tiboyi l'rabbanan. This shaila we would ask both according to ben zoyma as well as according to the rabbanan. The pligi Allah who argue on Rabbi Yehuda. Tiboyi leven zoyma. The shaila will be according to ben zoyma, who could be even a raisa. Ad kan lemechayev ben zoyma. Where does ben zoyma mechayev a tefillah ela legavoy? That's if you're standing inside the hazara. That's when there's a chiyuv tefillah. But if you're not inside the azara, you're physically outside the azara. Loy, maybe ben zoyma wouldn't be mechayev with the tefillah. Adilma also limshuche, or maybe he's concerned that if you're working out of the azara, you might end up coming in. You're working on something there. You might have an issue that you forget and you walk in. Therefore, maybe you should be mechuyev tefillah as well. Tiboy l'rabban the pligel Rabbi Yehuda. We would also have a shaila according to Rabban who argue on Rabbi Yehuda, who hold that a regular person never needs tefillah, only a mature needs tefillah. So akan like Amir Rabban Hasam, like Avar Avoda. Rabban said a normal person entering the azara that's not doing avoda does not require tefillah. Avalacha de Avar Avoda. But here, where he's doing an avodah, he's doing the shrita loy. You have to toivel. You have to toivel before you do an avodah, even though you're not inside. Or maybe it doesn't make a difference since you're not doing avodah. Since you never have to toivel if you're going into the azara. So therefore, even outside the azara, you would not have to toivel. Not take it. So the interesting thing is the Gemara here refers to shchita as an avodah. Yet we know that even though Yisrael is a lot of shech, so it's not an avodah. So So the Tosfos Rishonim speaks about it, I believe. And let me see if I can find the lashon of the Tosfos Rishonim on the side. It's right over here. So frank the Tosfos Rishonim, ha the kori hacha l'shchita avoda. That the Gemara here is referring to shchita as avoda. Loy tiksi. Don't ask a kasha. Amai darminu b'kamaduchti that shchita lav avoda. Don't ask from the Gemaras that say many times that shchita is not an avoda and therefore it can be done with a zar. All mean when the Gemara says in many places that shchita is not an avoda, it just means it's not an avoda that requires a kohen. But avad it is an avoda, and therefore maybe the Rabbanon would say that even though normally going into the azara does not require tefillah, but when you're doing an avoda, you still need to have a tefillah. Or even according to Ben Zoyma, who holds your mechuyev, maybe since you're not inside the azara, maybe you shouldn't need a tefillah in such a case. So the Gemara obliges with a teku, whether or not someone's shachting with a very long knife, whether or not he has a chiyuv to be tefillah.
Yossi, just out of curiosity, is there any other avoda that doesn't require a kohen?
Well, I'm not sure if they're labeled avodas, but we know that the kohanim who worked in the butchering area, the people, not the kohanim, the people who did hefshet and netuach, who did not have to be kohanim. So that was a process. It was a step in the process of the carbon. I don't know if it's technically called an avodah. Okay, let's see the Gemara about it. Chamesh tefillos basar kedushin toiv. We learned that the Kohen Gadol had to toivel 5 times on Yom Kippur, and at each tevilah he made kiddush yadayim v'reglayim before and after, which would net a total of 10 kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. Tanu Rabbanan, Chamesh tevilos basar kedushin toivel Kohen Gadol u'mekadosh b'yom. The Kohen Gadol toivels 5 times and makes kiddush yadayim v'reglayim 10 times on Yom Kippur. V'chulam b'kodesh b'beis haparva. All of these tevilas are b'kodesh b'beis haparva. Chutz mirishayna, except for the first tefillah, which was before he entered the azara. He wasn't allowed to enter the azara before the tefillah, so by definition he had to make the tefillah outside of the perimeter of the azara. Shehoisa b'choil, and that was al gabi shar hamayim, which was the first case of Watergate. Right, that was the first Watergate that we ever had in the world. Was the Shar Hamayim, was Watergate. And if the Kohen wouldn't have went to the mikveh, it would have been a Watergate scandal. So Baruch Hashem, he went to the mikveh. So it's ad l'shkoseh, and in fact, this mikveh was near the chambers where he was staying. Remember, we once had a shaila where his chambers were, because it didn't make sense that he should have to go all the way around the base of Mikdash to get to his first mikveh. It makes sense that his lishka was near the Shar Hamayim, which means it would have been near the mikveh that he had to go to first thing in the morning.
By the way, I just want to point out that the Watergate Hotel is named after the Shar Hamayim. It's
Where's the Watergate Hotel? Oh, in Washington.
yes.
Uh-huh.
Just
who put that together? Why would somebody name a hotel in Washington?
there's a lot of names of the gates, like the Lions Gate, right? This is after. Also, there's the Lions Gate in Shara Ashba. Nobody names after, but
Motel 6.
yeah, good. Okay, but the Watergate is named after the Shar in Yerushalayim.
Wow, look at that. I wonder if the average person on the street knows that.
No, for sure they don't.
It also tells us that the Jews must have owned the hotels.
Yeah.
It stems very good because we learn a lot in Chazal that all the nations of the world were fighting over Yerushalayim. And in fact, that's not truthful. So someone once told me a pshat that every country wanted to have an embassy in Yerushalayim. Now it's not so much like that. We have to fight for them to move there to Yerushalayim. But there was a time where Yerushalayim was like considered such a center that any country that was worth anything, that had any type of prestige, had to have an embassy in Yerushalayim. So could be that gave Yerushalayim such a level of prestige. So especially in cities where there are seats of government, they would want to have names of places that were associated with Yerushalayim. Now let's see what the Gemara says weiter. Now here there's a little bit of a problem. The reason why there's a little bit of a problem, and Tosfos asked the kasha, is how could you have a mikveh on the roof of a chamber that's in the Azara and consider that like you're toiveling in the Azara? And Tosfos in the first middle line asks, the roofs we learned of the structures in the Azara were not kodesh, which means if you have a mikveh that's on the second level, on the roof of the base of parva, that would not be considered inside the Azara. So how could we make sense out of these two facts? The Shloimer, and now it gets to elevation. Whenever you look at drawings, you can't just look at a floor plan. You need to look at the elevations, because the elevations make a huge difference. The Shloimer, the Gag base parva, the roof of the base of parva, Hayeshava lakarka Azara, was parallel with the karka Azara, which means that maybe you accessed it from Choil, you accessed it from Harabayis, where the elevation could have been lower, but the roof of the base of parva might have been parallel with the floor of the Azara. But then we're going to have another problem that Tosfos brings up, which means now you're entering into this chamber, you're entering it from Harabayis. We learned any chamber that you enter from Harabayis is not considered Azara. You look at its entrance. Its entrance determines if it's Kodesh or Choil. So there's a whole bunch of different svaras. So one svar that Tosfos suggests is that, in fact, it was underground, but the way you got into it was not through the Harabayis. You got into it through the Lishkas Hamadichin, which is the place where they washed out the intestines, which was Kodesh, which was open to Kodesh, and through the Lishkas Hamadichin, you went up the stairs. There was a circular stairs that you went up to get to the base of parva. So there is a little bit of question in the Rishonim about the topography and how everything aligned so that it should be considered the Kodesh. But that's going to come into question with the next steps in the Gemara. Omer Abaye, Zok Abaye, Shema Mina, Ayin Item, Gevoya Mikarka Azara, Esrim V'Sholish Amis. Ayin Item was a place, I believe it was to the east of Yerushalayim, that was elevated, that had a spring that delivered water, any water from a spring, from Ayin Item, which was 23 amas in elevation, higher than the Azara, so water would be able to flow down from Ayin Item to the Azara. So let's see what Rashi says. Ayin Item, Nimenu ba amas hamayim lebeis tefillah shar hamayim shalach bayim. Ayin Item was the source of water to the mikveh that was on top of the shar hamayim. Well, if the Inyan HaMakrois nearly, based on analyzing the psukim of Rashi, I think Shuma Ayin Meinef Toyach, it's the same Ayin that was referred to as Meinef Toyach, Ha'ober B'Sefer Yeshua, which is discussed in Sefer Yeshua. Shemishom, from that area, Hagvul Mishapeh V'Yored, L'Mizrach U'L'Mayr. From there, the border of Eretz Yisrael drops to east and to the west. So I'm assuming that Yerushalayim is to the west of this. V'hu Hagvul V'Chol Eretz Yisrael. I might be wrong. V'hach Mosad Abaye, Mishum Darmin B'Zvachim, Sover L'Mevanaya L'Beis HaMikdash Beinitam. There was a Havamina for them to build the Beis HaMikdash in Ayin Itam, which would have been the highest part. Amri, they said, Nichsebe Porta, let's lower the elevation. Let's find a place where the land is lower than it is at the highest point, which is Ayin Itam. We want the Beis HaMikdash to be in between two shoulders, so it should be in an area that's a little lower than the highest elevation in Eretz Yisrael. And here is, we don't know where we got that from, but now Abai is explaining, this is how we know that, in fact, Ayin Itam had to be at a higher level than the Azara.
You know what the context is of in Yeshua?
Main of Toyach, no.
They're not talking about the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, are they?
I'm not sure. It sounds like it is.
Because that's because
That would be
Yerushalayim's nowhere near Yerushalayim's nowhere near the borders of Eretz Yisrael. I don't understand what we're talking about here.
It doesn't have to be near. We're just trying to show that it's at a lower elevation.
Right. So it's not the context of the borders of Eretz Yisrael.
Well, maybe Mein of Toyach is near the border of Eretz Yisrael. And this the area of the Azor is a little bit lower in elevation than that. Is Ayin Itam a place that we know of today?
I don't know. I don't recall this at all. But what do you mean? Are you saying that there wasn't a Havaminah that the Beis Hamikdash would be there? Is there? Was it?
Yes, Sober L'Mevanaya L'Beis Hamikdash, but Ayin Itam. The Gemara's Vachim says that they had a Havaminah to build the Beis Hamikdash. I guess that means when David was discussing it with Shmuel, there was a Havaminah to build it in Ayin Itam. And they said, no, it can't be at such a high elevation. It's got to be a little bit lower than that.
That's if Yeshua was long before David HaMelech. I don't understand.
Rashi is just trying to pinpoint where this place is. So Rashi suggests that it might be what was referred to as Mein of Toyach. What we call Anitim today in the Gemara's times might have been referred to as Mein of Toyach in Yeshua's times.
Okay.
I'll have to do some homework on to figure out precisely where that was. So Zok the Gemara, Anitim must have been 23 amas above the elevation. Why is that? Because Rashi explains, Kamidas Goyva Sharamayim. Let's figure at however high in elevation the Shar Hamayim was, which the mikvah was on top of it, Einitim must have been taller than that, because water flows only in the direction that gravity pulls. That's down. Water doesn't flow up. So therefore, you must say that the Einitim was 23 amas higher than the Karkazar, Kamidas Goyva Shar Hamayim, which would have been how high the Shar Hamayim was. Ubinyan Kli, Shal Shalosh amas. So the Shar Hamayim was 20 amas high. Then you built a vessel that was 1 amma by 1 amma by 3 amas, which is the size of a mikvah, and that was built on top of the Shar Hamayim, which means you needed even higher elevation to get water into that bor. Uvinyan shel sholish amas milamayla lahachsav karbamsa. She'i efshir lamayim lalois lahar shehu gavoya imakim shenoivim sham. It's impossible for water to travel up. Water only travels down. So therefore, we know that the wall of the Zohar was 20 amas, and we know that there was a mikvah on top of that, which would have been another 3 amas. So therefore, in order for that mikvah to get filled from water in Einitim had to be at least 23 amas above the level of the Zohar. Zokt Gemara weiter. It's now we learn, Kolab Sochem Shoyu Shom, all of the doorways into the Azara, Goyvan Esrim Amma, they were 20 amas high, Verachvan Esr amas, and they are 10 amas wide, Chutz Mishal Ulam, except for the door entering the front entrance of the Ulam, Shagavay Rashis Arboim, who was 40 amas high, Verachvay Esrim. So since the doorway was 20 amas, you needed an extra 3 amas. Utanya we learned, Verachatz Besari B'mayim B'mei Mikvah. We also learned that the Kohen has to toivel in the mikvah, kol b'sarai, and we learn mayim shekol gufa oila behem. It has to be water that his whole goof would fit into. How much is that? Chamahain, amal amal, a square amma, berum gimel amas with a height of 3 amas. The shir chachamim may mikvah b'amsah. So since the mikvah is 3 amas high, it must be that the water level of Anitim was a little bit higher than that. And Tosfos asks the obvious question. Tosfos asks that who said the mikveh had to be vertical? Why couldn't the mikveh be horizontal? It has to be a shear of amal amma brum shalosh amas. So maybe it was an amma high, an amma wide, and 3 amas long. It was like a bathtub. That would be good as well. So Tosfos says one of the truths Tosfos offers is that it's very hard. It's very hard for a kohen who's older and is working hard a whole day to bend down each time to get into the mikveh. So therefore, they bedavka put him into a mikveh where we can go and standing up, where it would be easier for him. And then Tosfos discusses that a person is 3 amas. He proves that a person can be 3 amas excluding his head. So he's still too high. So how is he going to fit into the mikveh? So Tosha says it was very simple. When you get into the mikveh, you're displacing water. So the water level actually goes up higher. So even though the water has to be before you get into it, you better make sure your bar is deeper than that, because the water level is going to go up when you go in, and the kohen could bend his hand out a little bit, and this way he would be completely submerged in the water. Okay, your cheshbon is wrong. If you're going to say that you only need it to be, that I need to only need it to be 23 amas above the elevation of the Azora, you need more, because the doorway is 20 amas high, but there's got to be a roof on top of that. So the roof would be an amma thick. They made very thick walls then, or very thick floors, and then above the ceiling, that would be above the shar, there would be another amma of waterproofing material that they would use to build the bar with. And Rashi says that part of their waterproofing material was a material maziba that actually absorbed water, and that's how it absorbed water, but that's how it sealed the water from dripping out. I don't know how they did their shower stalls in those days. So frankly, no, they didn't need 2 amas thick like a typical construction in those times would have needed, because the Beis Hamikdash, the gateways of the Beis Hamikdash, even the Shishaninu, since they were made out of marble, they were very, very strong stone, and I guess they would not allow water to drip through. The mashu abdilahu, it was enough to have just a mashu. So frankly, more, but mashu. How could you say that it's 23 amas? It would have to be 23 amas and a mashu. So since it's not an amma, just a mashu, yes, in fact, when we said that the elevation of Anitim is 23 amas above the floor of the Zora, means 23 amas plus. But we didn't mention that plus because it's a small amount. We're not being scientifically accurate. Parsha Sadin Shabbos. What did they use to shroud, to shield the Kohen Gadol from the peering eyes of the spectators in the Beis Hamikdash? They held up a sudden Shabbat so no one could see. It's like I think I once mentioned when they were doing a renovation and Malkil Kotler's house, when the Yeshiva of Lakewood's house, they put wooden barriers around the construction site, so all the Miladim Bochum who are struggling for their paychecks and are waiting for their late coil checks don't have to witness the beautiful renovation that was being done at the time in the Rosh Yeshiva's house. So one chutzpahdik took a big sign and he slapped it on. There's always billboards and signs posted on these wooden construction barriers, and it said, "Your coil check dollars hard at work." So in those days, they gave him a hard time. So anyway, so they also created this barrier made out of boots. So my shnoshal boots. Why do they make it out of white linen? The Damar of Kahana, Kadeshi Yakir Shavoidus Hayoim, the Big Day boots. In Reb Kahana said later on by the Big Day later on, Reb Kahana said that it's so that the Kohen should realize that things are different today and he shouldn't make any mistakes. Hachanami, here too, we could say by the first tefillah of the day, Sheyakir Shavoidus Hayoim, the Big Day boots. And Rashi says, Shavoidus Hayoim, the Big Day boots. Sheyesh Hayoim Olav Avoida She Big Day boots. We want the Kohen to become aware that today he's going to be dressed for a certain avoidus in white linen. This Kohen Gadol was not accustomed to working without his 8 begodim, the Yesh Men Shal Zav, and there's many begodim that are even made out of gold, going tzitz, the choshen, the ephod, upamoini amil, and the little pomegranates that hang down at the bottom of the mill, of which they found one, and you can actually see what it looked like. They actually found one in the tunnels by the Kosel tunnels. So in fact, since the Kohen needed to become aware that he's working today in Big Day Lovan, that's why he wore it. So Tosfos asks a very pashut akasha. Rav Kahana was referring to one of the later tefillos, and he said that's why they surrounded him with boots. Why didn't Rav Kahana address the first tefillah? Because isn't the first tefillah the most important tefillah where he's already learning his new mindset? One of the later tefillahs, he's already been back and forth. So Rav Kahana should have made his statement that by the very first Tefillah. We're saying Rav Kahana made a statement elsewhere, and we want to apply it to here as well. Question: why didn't Rav Kahana make his statement over here? So Tosfos says over here, the Kamon Gabi Avila Big Day Lavan is when they brought him the Big Day Lavan later on, not by the first time where he put on Big Day Zov. That's where he said it. But Tamer Frek Tosfos Maishno do Amar Lamilsa Sefer V'Leiresha. Why didn't Rav Kahana comment on the very first time of the day that they used these linen barriers? Why did he wait till the second time that the linen barriers were used to make a comment on it? On the first time they used the barriers, Rav Kahana didn't even feel the need to mention it. The pshita the tzarech hakera shloyita v'yilbush kol ches begodim k'derech shu oisa kol yom oisa shana. The first time it's obvious that the Kohen Gadol needed that reminder because it's the very first time he's making a change. When he takes off his choil clothing, he's wearing all the shmona begodim. Ulakach parsha big day boots kadesh yakir shayoim einay lubosh big day boots in big day zav. So the first time it was obvious to Rav Kahana that they had to do that. But even the second time, where he's changing out of his big day lovin and putting on big day boots, there we need to tell him that don't add the big day boots to the big day zav. Rather, elabifnei atman, you should only wear them by themselves. I'm sorry, I read this wrong. This is now. Now we're telling you that when you take off the big day lovin, he's first putting on the big day, the shmona begodim. So when you take off these shmona begodim, make sure you take them off to put on the big day books later. Don't add the big day books on top of these big days off. Aval b'seifa, which is where Rav Kahana actually expressed this thought, shuposhit big days off, where he's taking off the big days off, the libos begodim acherim. There, salkadaita chamina do I have a tzarech hakera. I would have thought that there he doesn't need a hecker because he's taking off the big days off at that time. The vade lost limiti. So by the first tefillah, where he's putting on this big day zav for the first time, we want to remind him you're putting on the big day zav now, but you're not keeping it on all day. Later you're going to change out of it and you're going to put on big day lavan. So there it's a chiddush to remind him. Later on, when he's actually taking off the big day zav and putting on the big day lavan, he just took it off. There it's more obvious. Then maybe then you don't need that reminder. Zok Rav Kahana, even there you should use that reminder. Since the first time it's a given, they use the boots to tell the Kohen that today's going to be different. So you might think once he had that initial reminder at the beginning of the day, Sagi B'Hachi, the rest of the day they don't need to provide further reminders. They even did it again. For every tefillah they did it to constantly remind him that today's avodas are different than other avodas. It's amazing. He rehearsed for a week and he did so many different things to prepare, yet they were still providing him with these reminders. Pashat, he got undressed. Yorad. So Pashas, I believe this is the Pashat of taking off his weekday clothing. Yorad, the Tabal, he went into the Tefillah at the top of the water gate. Olay came up, Vinistapek, and he wiped himself. It's funny that the Mishnah always speaks out Vinistapik. It doesn't say anywhere in the Avodas Hayoim that he had to wipe himself off. Yet the Tana goes out of his way each time to discuss, to say Vinistapik. And in fact, when we read the Avodah on Yom Kippur itself, we always speak of Vinistapik. And Rashi, what it means is Misapif Balunta Shalbeged, Lisvag Maim Shalbasori. He actually wiped himself off with a towel, Vinistapik Viniskanech. Why is this so important to be mentioned? So the Meshech Chachma actually on Parshas Achri Mois makes a very nice deal. Most of the time, when the Torah says Tevilah, the Torah says Varachat es Pesarei b'mayim. But there's one place where the pasuk deviates from his normal expression of Tevilah, and it says Varachas b'mayim es kol Pesarei. Instead of saying Varachat es Pesarei b'mayim, the pasuk is Varachat es b'mayim es kol Pesarei. So the b'mayim is put first. And the Meshech Chacham is bedaik from there, relevant to Gemara that we learned. We learned to Gemara that you're allowed to use slightly worn begodim, although that's not the best way to do avodah. You're allowed to use slightly worn begodim, shchokim, they were referred to. From V'nicham Shom, we learned that you're allowed to wear shchokim. You're allowed to wear slightly worn, even though that's not the right way. So Zok the Meshech Chacham, if there was any water droplets on the Kohen Gadol's body, when he would put on the nice, clean, fresh linen, the water would stain. And you would see if your shirt gets wet in certain places, you'll see the shirt looks wet. It almost looks like a stain in those places. And that would be shchokim, that would make the begadim not perfect the way they're supposed to be. And he learns that from Verachatz Bamayim is called Basari. Verachatz Bamayim, you have to wash, and then you have to get rid of any water as called Basari from anywhere on his skin. And that's where the Rosh Chachma learns the Vinistapa comes from. Heviloi Big Day Zov. They brought him his Big Day Zov, which was the usual begadim that he wore on every other day. The Lovash, he put them on, and then after he put on the begadim, the Kiddush Yoda Varakla. So clearly, our Mishnah is saying that he, how many times did he do Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim the very first time he got dressed? Once. He didn't do Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim upon taking off his weekday clothing. Rather, he got undressed from his weekday clothing. He went in, it wasn't weekday clothing, it was his choil clothing, it was on Yom Kippur. I'm sure he was wearing a shtramal and beketche, but it wasn't his big day kahuna. And he went to the mikveh, he put on the big day zov, and then he made Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim once. Then they realized a tamid. They brought him the carbon tamid, kurtzai, and the Gemara is going to focus on what it means. But what it means is he shechted roiv two simonim, umirik acher shchita al yadai, and he had someone else finish out the shchita. Rashi says ein kabbalas adam ksher elo b'kohen gadol. The kabbalas adam had to be done only with the kohen gadol, v'tzarich l'maru l'kabel. So he had to make sure that by the time any blood's coming out, he's ready to catch that blood in the keli. Kibbalas adam, he was makabel the blood. V'zarkai, and he spritzed it on the mizbeach, and then in nichnas lahaktik ketar shel shachar, he went again to do the daily routine with his big day zav, which was the maktik ketar shel shachris, ulahetev esaneris, and to clean out the menorah, ulahaktiv esaroish v'esavorim of the carbon tamid, and the Aleph says the esa chavitin, the esa yain, and the chavitin of the yain. Notice that when we discussed the goyrel about the different opportunities to bring up the carbon tamid, there was the mincha that serviced the carbon tamid itself, and then there was the chavit. Yet over here, it doesn't say anything about that mincha. So the Mefarshim bring a raya from here that the mincha did not have to be brought by day. The mincha could have been brought by night. And being that it was such a busy day, they left any avodah that wasn't necessary to be done at that moment, they left it for later. Ketarish shel shachar, ha'ishakreva, bein dam le'ivarim. When were they marked here? The ketarish shel shachar, between the spritzing the blood of the carbon tamid on the mizbech chitzon and putting the ivarim of the carbon tamid onto the mizbeach. In between that, the ketarish was brought. Bein dam le'ivarim, and then shel bein arbaim, and the ketarish of bein arbaim was you were marked that bein ivarim l'nesachim after they were makriv all of the ivarim of the Talmud Shel Shachar, but before you did in the Sachim of the Talmud Shel Shachar, that's when they brought the second Keteris. What if the Kohen Gadol was an old person or he couldn't handle cold water? Because the mikveh had cold water from a spring, from Ainitim, so Mechaman Lechaim, Chamin, before Yom Kippur, they prepared in a thermos hot water, and they would pour it into the cold water of the mikveh, in order to warm it up. And there's a whole big shaila. Are you allowed to do this? The halacha is ein shvus b'mikdash. So if it was inside the Beis HaMikdash itself, it wouldn't be a problem. But this tefillah was the tefillah in the Sharamayim, which was out of the confines of the Azara. So there they needed a special permission to be able to do that, because otherwise it would not have been allowed, because it was not considered the mikdash. Dr. Moore, Amur Rabbanon Kamei Dera Papa. Well, they allowed him if he that's the attack. They allowed him because of that. In Echanami. So Amur Rabbanon Kamei Dera Papa. The Rabbanon suggested to Rav Papa that had the like Rav Meir. Our Mishnah cannot be consistent with the sheet of Rav Meir. The Rav Meir would not agree with our Mishnah, because as I mentioned before, when he changed out of his weekday clothing into his big days off, he only made Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim once. But Rav Meir would have held, even though Trey Kiddushay Alavisha of it, since Rav Meir held that the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim was not associated with the begadim that he was taking off. It's only associated with the begadim that he's putting on. So therefore, he would have to have done 2 times Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim even before he put on the big day Lavan. So Kivan the Amar Trey Kiddushi Alavisha Abed Lahu Hachanami la'avid trei kedusha alavisha. So to here, when he was getting dressed for the very first time, it should have required kiddush yerglayim verglayim 2 times. Amul Rapapa said that's not true. Vein l'Rabbanon, vein l'Rab Meir, Sai according to Rabban, Sai according to Rab Meir, Chad Apshita Devig de Chodesh, the Chad al Levisha. The Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim that was made twice, every time he changed back and forth from one set of begadim to the other set of begadim, everybody agrees one was for the previous begadim that he took off, and one was for the new set of begadim that he put on. So let's get exactly what the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chacham Mar, so that we can see why there's a controversy as to precisely what the machlokes is. So Zok Tehelig Rashi, like Reb Meir, the Polag B'Masnisen, Reb Meir argues in the Mishnah later on, the Tvila Shnia. So Mishnah later on is going to discuss exactly the process that occurred when he was changing out of his Big Day Zav into Big Day Lavan and how the Tfilas work. Ad Rabbanan, he argues on the Rabbanan there, so you makdimon Chidush L'Pshita. The Rabbanan said that before he took off his Big Day Lavan, he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Then he took off the Big Day Zav. Sorry, he was wearing Big Day Zav. So before he took off the Big Day Zav, he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Then he took off the Big Day Zav. Then he went into the mikveh. Then he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim again. And then he put on the Big Day Lavan. That's how the Rabbanan learned. Well, who hit the Pshita L'Kiddush? Reb Meir held no. When he takes off his Big Day Zav, he doesn't make Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before he takes them off. First he takes off the Big Day Zav, and then he makes Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So that could lead us to believe that the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim wasn't serving the removal of his begadim, rather it's serving the putting on the new begadim. It's not Reb Meir Omer Pashat the Kiddush. First he took off the Big Day Zav, and only then did he make Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Which meaning, so at first glance it seems the Svirle, the Shnei Kiddushin, Shehishach HaKosav, then Beged LeBeged, the 2 times Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim mandated by the Torah for the Kohen Gadol to do when he changes from one set of begadim to the others, they're both in honor of the new begadim that he's putting on. So what he takes off is irrelevant. All that matters is the begadim that he's putting on, and that's why their first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is done after the original begadim were taken off, because you're not doing it for the original begadim, you're doing it in honor of the new begadim you're putting on. The Kami Masnisen lav the Kavazitan. That would render our Mishnah not going according to him. The Reb Meir, he's according to Reb Meir, but Tefillah Rishono Nami, but at first Tefillah, even though he's only taking off Big Day Choil, it's not relevant because she should require Trei Kedusha. He should have to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim twice. So Big Day Kodesh should balilbosh because the begadim he's putting on are Big Day Kodesh, and according to the first understanding of Reb Meir, you have to make twice Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim whenever you put on Big Day Kodesh. So Amalu Rapapa, that's not Pshat and Reb Meir. Bein l'Rabban, bein l'Reb Meir, Chara Pshita de Big Day Kodesh, the Chara Lavisha. One of the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is made for the previous begadim, and one is made for the new begadim, and therefore, even Reb Meir would agree that when you're taking off Big Day Choil, there you don't need Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for it, and he would agree with our Mishnah that by the first dressing, the Kohen only made Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim once in honor of the new begadim that he's putting on. So why did Reb Meir hold that you make Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after you took off the old clothing, not before? It's just a machlokes in how to darshan the psukim. It says in the pasuk Pashat v'rachatz v'lovash, and we darshan that the rechitza is referring to the pshita, to taking off, and to the lovash. So Rav Meir Savar Makash Pshita L'Levisha. We're comparing the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim done in honor of taking off begadim to the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim that we're doing in honor of putting on the new begadim. Malavisha loivish v'achach mekadosh. Just like when he puts on the clothing, the new clothing, he makes Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after he puts on his new clothing. Af pshita, so too when he's removing clothing, it's poshet v'achach mekadosh. It's the same order of operation when you're putting on the new begadim that you do the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after you put them on. So too when you're taking off, the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim that's done in honor of the begadim that you're taking off has to be done after you take them off. Rabban Savri Makash Pshita to Levisha. We also compare Pshita to Levisha, but from a different perspective. Malavisha Kishulovish Mekadesh. When you put on the new begadim, you make Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after you put on the new begadim, meaning while you're dressed. Pshita, so too when you're taking off clothing, Kishulovish Mekadesh. The Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is done while they're dressed, which by definition is before they take them off. So Amul Rabban Papa. So the Rabban attacked Rav Papa, and they told him, how could you say that Reb Meir holds that the first tefillah, according to Reb Meir, would have also needed two kiddush? I'm sorry, would have only needed one kiddush Rabbi Meglayim. Rav Papa, you want to say that Reb Meir stems with our Mishnah, and Reb Meir would also agree that for the first kiddush Rabbi Meglayim, at the first tefillah of the day, he only needs it once because it's you only need one for the one that you're putting on, and since he's taking off big dechol, it wouldn't need kiddush and raglayim. But Tanya, we learned exactly the opposite of what you're saying. It says Pasha Sodin Shalbut Beinoy Lebeinaam. Pashat, he got undressed, the Yarab, and he went into the mikveh, the Taval, all of in his topic, and then he vila big days off. Then he put on the first set of clothing, the Lovish the kiddush of the Viraglo. That's what the Tanakama says. But Reb Meir says, Reb Meir Aimer Pashat the kiddush of the Viraglo. Reb Meir says beferish that when you took off your big day choil, you did make kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Then the yard v'tavel all over this topic, and v'yela big days of the lovish v'kiddush yadayim v'raglav. So you, Rav Papa, wants to say Reb Meir agrees with our Mishnah that but a first changing when he took off his big day chol to put on his big days of, he made kiddush yadayim v'raglayim only once. Here the Brisa says black and white that Reb Meir holds that did it twice. So you know what he answered? Amalu. Rav Papa answered, no, Tanya. If that's what it says, that's what it says. I thought I could make him stand with the Mishnah, but now that you've proven me otherwise, okay, so you're right, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, I'll get the Chodesh, everybody, and we should have all the brachas of Chodesh Nifen of Keish Echad, B'lei V'achad, without any of the difficulties that have.
Amen.